If you go onto Amazon and look for the cheapest Wi-Fi mesh system, this is what you will find. Basically, you'll find a bunch of mesh systems in the range of $100 to $150. But are they any good? This is what we're going to discuss and find out right now. Specifically, we'll be looking at this, the Rockspace mesh Wi-Fi system. The reason I'm talking about this one specifically today is because Rockspace actually sent this unit to me to evaluate and look at, so that's what I've been doing. Before I talk about the Rockspace, I do want to point out I've been looking at a bunch of mesh systems, and as you will notice on these Amazon pages, it looks like a bunch of these are the same. They all use the same app. My guess is that most of these are probably made in the same factory in China. They have a lot of the same components. But the real question is, are these any good? So to find out, I'm testing speed, I'm testing distance, I'm testing functionality, and I'm testing consistency. So for speed, I ran speed tests from 9 different websites, and I found that the speed results were actually pretty consistent. So I'm getting about 120 megabits per second down and about 6 megabits per second up. And just for some context, I am on Xfinity's 100 megabit per second plan. So the fact that I'm getting 120 megabits per second probably means I'm maxing out what they're allowing me to have on the plan. The other thing I wanted to test specifically for speed is LAN transfer speeds. So I set up a test where I used my computer up on the top floor of my house, and I sent it all the way down to the server I have in the basement of my house, and I transferred different files of different sizes and timed to see how long it took so I could get the speed for doing this. I tested a 300 megabyte file and a 3 gigabyte file, and the average transfer times for these files was about 12 megabytes per second for writing time and about 95 megabytes per second read time. And to put that in perspective, I tested this against some of the more expensive mesh systems that I have, and this is actually on the slower end of the LAN transfer speeds. The next test I did was a distance test. I went outside on my property. I went to basically the farthest point on my property to my home. You can see in this video here about how far I am from my house. When I ran this test, I only had one mesh node. It's in the middle of my house, and I was all the way on the outside of my property. I was getting about 84 megabits per second. So I wasn't getting the top speed I was inside the house, but 84 megabits per second is still pretty decent for when I am outside. I don't use Wi-Fi a whole lot outside, but when I'm doing yard work, it's nice to still be connected to Wi-Fi. I was actually rather impressed with the distance of just using one node. If I had multiple nodes on the outsides of my home, I'm sure I could get a bit further. Once I got beyond my property line, the signal started dropping out and I was getting really slow speeds as expected. But really anywhere inside of my home, I was getting a really good connection and getting really good speeds. And even out in my yard, almost any place in my yard, I was getting a great connection and good speeds as well. As far as functionality goes, compared to other mesh systems I've used, this has your most basic functions. The app it comes with is a fairly decent app, and as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, it's the same app that's used on a lot of other lower end mesh systems. The app shows you what devices you're connected to. It gives you information such as MAC address and IP address if you want to view that for the specific devices. It also lets you change your wireless mode. I usually use my mesh networks in bridged mode, so I can use my Ubiquiti router to do a lot of the heavy lifting for stuff like that. But you can also put this in DHCP mode. When you do, you have a lot more options for what you can do with the mesh network. It's super easy to add a mesh node, especially when you just get it out from the box because they're already paired together. You basically just plug it in. You can set up a guest network on this, and you can specify how long you want the guest network to be active for. There's also some parental controls, so you can put different devices in different groups, and then you can specify during which times of the day you want to allow them to use the internet. Some of the other features this has, it has quality of service, fast roaming, capacity oriented mode. Now, this mesh network does allow up to 60 devices. It also has port forwarding. It also has DHCP server customization, and you can specify which DNS server you want to use. One feature that's missing that I noticed because I use this feature is IP reservations. You cannot do that on this mesh network. That is why I use my own router and I put this in bridged mode so I can do that sort of thing. Most people probably don't even know what that is or don't care to use that. But if you are someone who needs to reserve static IP addresses for your network, this mesh network is not going to give you that functionality. Another thing that I have noticed is firmware upgrades. I have never seen a firmware upgrade for this. Honestly, I don't know if I ever am going to see a firmware upgrade. So far, I've talked about speed, been really impressed, distance, really impressed, functionality, normal for what you would expect from a mesh network. Now let's talk about reliability and consistency. I think this is kind of the area where it's more noticeable with the lower end mesh network systems. I already mentioned that Rockspace sent this evaluation system to me to do this review. But to be honest, this is actually the second one that they sent me. The reason they sent me 2 units is that I tried the first unit for about a month, and just about every day I was having problems with the network just dropping to really low speeds that were completely unusable, and it seemed to me that the mesh network was just horrible, not usable. They sent me this other unit, and this unit's actually been really, really good. But it does beg the question, which unit is more the norm? The good one I have or the one I had that wasn't working very well? Even with the second unit that they sent me that is working really well, I've seen on a handful of occasions some kind of weird dropping of signal or slower than average speeds every once in a while. And like I've mentioned before, I've never seen a firmware upgrade with this mesh system. I also don't think I've seen an improvement with the app either. Altogether, as far as reliability and consistency is concerned, I've been more or less happy with the second unit that they sent me. That being said, it has not performed as well as the more expensive mesh networks that I have. Overall, I've been using this for about 2 months, and I actually have my standard mesh network set up at my home, and I have this Rockspace mesh network set up as well. I've kind of been switching back and forth between the two. And honestly, sometimes I'm on the Rockspace network and I don't realize that I'm on this network because it performs and acts just as it does my more expensive mesh network, and it, for the most part, performs really well. Yes, I've had some issues with consistency. Every once in a while, the speed will drop just a bit for maybe a few minutes. That is something I think that you need to consider when you're looking at these lower end or these inexpensive mesh networks. Do they work? Sure. Do they work well? Yes, most of the time. Are they as consistent and reliable as the more expensive mesh networks? Probably not. And for me, I've seen evidence of that being the case. So I think if you're a home user and you have maybe up to 50 devices or something like that, and right now you're currently just using a single router and you just want to expand your signal a little bit more or maybe increase the speed a little bit more, I think this actually can be a really good option for you. I think for the most part, it does actually work pretty well. I think if you're a small business owner or you're a power user or you just have a lot of devices in your home, you may want to consider a more expensive mesh system. If you've had experience with some of these more inexpensive mesh networks, let me know what you think, or let me know what mesh network you think is the best. I'm always trying to try out different mesh networks, so let me know what you think about different mesh networks, and have a great day. Thanks.